Explains History! Welcome back to A Kid Explains History. Revolutions are pretty interesting things. It's when people get sick of their leaders, kick them out, and change how their country is run. Just over 100 years ago, this is what happened in Russia. Today we ask the question, how did Russia go from being a monarchy to a communist state? And what exactly is a communist anyway? Let me try and break that down for you. Since the Middle Ages, most people lived under some kind of feudal system. That basically meant most people were not allowed to own land, and they were forced to work for a smaller number of people who could. An economic system based on private ownership grew out of feudalism, and it was called capitalism. This system flourished under the Industrial Revolution, where machines led to factories and mass production. It also led to bad conditions for the workers and the poor. This made people think about different ways of living, ways that might be more fair to more people. The idea of a community sharing property and wealth goes back to the ancient Greeks. But during the 17th century, the word communism started being used. It comes from the Latin word communis, which means common or universal. Communism calls for the elimination of private property, and a system where goods are owned by everyone and available to all as needed. A German guy called Karl Marx made the idea popular by writing the Communist Manifesto in 1848 with his friend Friedrich Engels. Lots of young people read this book, and one of them was a Russian named Vladimir Lenin, but more on him later. Feudalism lasted a lot longer in Russia than other places. This meant that a lot of Russians were still peasants by the end of the century. At the top of the heap was the Romanov Tsar, Nicholas II, who thought of himself as Russia's dad. The problem was, a lot of his kids were hungry. They thought that if he wasn't going to help them, at least he could let them help themselves. People began asking Nicholas to give up some of his power like kings had in other countries, so that they could have a say in government. He didn't like that. In 1905, people protested outside the Winter Palace with a list of demands. He really didn't like that. You see, the thing about being an absolute monarch is, as long as you have the army on your side, you don't really have to listen to anyone. So, when the protesters refused to leave, his soldiers shot at them. 500 people were killed or wounded, and it became known as Bloody Sunday. Protests got worse after that, though, and Nicholas finally agreed to set up a type of parliament called the Duma. At least it stopped a revolution, for now. World War I started in 1914 and went really bad for Russia. By the time 1917 came around, people were desperate enough to once again tell the Tsar that things needed to change. It was time for a revolution. Or should I say two? That's right, there were two. And they both happened in 1917. Busy year. The first happened in February, where once again the protest was held in front of the Winter Palace, and once again the protesters had to face off against the army. Just when you think it's 1905 all over again, something amazing happened. This time, a lot of soldiers refused to fire upon the crowds, and they actually started marching with them against the Tsar. On March 2nd, 1917, Tsar Nicholas had no choice but to step down. People were really happy, but no one knew what to do next. A provisional government, that means temporary, shared power with workers' councils called Soviets. Now, back to that guy I told you about, Lenin. He led a party called the Bolsheviks, and their slogan was peace, bread, and land. Lenin saw that the country was in chaos, so he and the Bolsheviks took over government buildings in October of 1917. This was the year's second revolution, and the one that put Lenin in charge of the country. Now all he had to do was win a civil war. His Red Army fought the anti-communist White Army, many of whom wanted to put Tsar Nicholas back on the throne. The Tsar was being held prisoner along with his family, while the Bolsheviks were figuring out what to do with them. Their solution wasn't great. In July 1918, worried the family could get rescued, the Bolshevik guards took Nicholas, his wife, their 4 daughters, and young son into a basement and shot them. Future Russian President Boris Yeltsin called this incident one of the most shameful in the pages of Russian history. The Red Army defeated the White Army in 1922, and Lenin founded a new country called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the USSR. He died in 1924, and after a power struggle, the new leader was Joseph Stalin in 1929. Stalin was more interested in keeping personal power than actually helping people by making the USSR a true communist state. He was a brutal dictator who killed people that didn't agree with him. His rule led to horrible man-made famines and a Cold War with the United States. So even though the revolution completely changed how the country was run, it didn't really have a happy ending for the Russian people. Thank you for watching. I want to give a big shout out to Jacob Goodman, because he was the one who suggested this topic today, so thanks, Jacob. If you guys have ideas, put them down in the comments, because that could be the next video. It's all up to you guys. And then sometimes it's up to me, but it's mostly up to you guys. Like, share, subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you can be the first to get those new A Kid Explains History videos. And I gotta go. Thanks.